I want to thank everyone for coming here this afternoon, and then for those who are staying for Shabbat service, I want to thank the Alabama Holocaust Education Center and USIA for this incredible event with our esteemed guests for this afternoon. And for this evening, we have Heather Johnston, CEO of USIA, Coach Bruce Pearl, and Senator Katie Britt. They have asked me for 5 minutes to talk about, can you hear? Okay. To talk about contemporary Jew hatred, because they're going to frame it in their conversation. My dissertation, my doctoral dissertation, is on contemporary Jew hatred. So we are going to try to look at 3 frames in one, and I will explain why we're seeing what we're seeing today. The first frame: after World War II with the Marshall Plan, a myriad of Arab immigrants went to Europe to help rebuild Europe. That was the first issue. The second issue in my research stems about 3 decades ago, which is the decline of Western values. What do I mean by that? A rejection of emancipation, where facts are no longer facts, where there's no longer nuance, where feelings have replaced what we know as history. And we start seeing this over and over again. So we have World War II, we have the rise of an illiberal society based in academia, and now we have the third problem. So in 2015, does anyone remember what happened in November of 2015? That was the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. The same day they attacked a Jewish neighborhood in Paris. The first time since World War II, synagogues in Paris were closed. So this is 2015, and for the most part, the Jewish world remained silent. And the Western world. December 2018, there was a murder in Muncie, New York, where Joseph Newman was murdered to death. He did not face justice. Right around the same time, there was another attack in Jersey City by the Black Israelites. Again, a major Jew hatred attack, very little outrage from the Jewish community and from the world press. In Paris, the murder of Sarah Halimi, I've talked about that many times. She was stabbed 23 times on her balcony. Her terrorist was shouting, Allahu Akbar, Takbir. Throughout the balcony, he was sentenced to nothing because the courts deemed that he was on marijuana, while at the same time, someone threw a dog out the window and got 5 years in jail. On top of that, in my research, there's been nonstop attacks of the Jewish community in urban areas, especially b'miuchad in New York, nonstop. And then in 2021, we saw the rise of Jew hatred up 1,000% throughout the world. So we've seen the writing on the wall. We've read it, but we've done nothing with it. We thought the archetype of the anti-Semitic movement was the white nationalist. That's no longer the narrative anymore. In my research, African Americans and Latinos ages 20 to 30 hold more anti-Semitic beliefs than white people ages 20 to 30. And so what you're seeing now with the rise of Europe and communities that did not become part of the European milieu, this is the response to what we're seeing. So this is the greatest gaslight in world history. So there'll be more time later to talk about how those 3 frames ended up where we are today. But I just wanted to give you some background regarding the world in which we live in. Heather.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Rabbi Wright, for hosting us. And it's so good to see our friends and to see this community out here on a Friday afternoon. And I just wanted to quickly get up and say to you from U.S. Israel Education Association and the Christian community that's sitting here in this room today that we are heartbroken. Over the events of this last month, both in Israel and also stateside here in the United States, and we can hardly believe our eyes and our ears, and wonderful recalling history, but when we step right into it ourselves, it has been a blast, more than we can bear. But I want you to know that this community here are dedicated to a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, which is very ultimate and central to a strong Jewish community in the world, a fortified Jewish community in this world. And I want you to know that there are friends that will stick closer than brothers. And I believe that we are those people. And I want to also just say that the day the war started, we have been on war footing with boots on the ground, and we have been in a war room for 1 solid month. Our organization, our team, we have not stopped working 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And we're not going to stop until we get through this, until we see the complete demise of Hamas and the raising of another flag in the Gaza Strip. Among other things, we are dedicated to working with our leaders in Congress and across the world to see change. And I believe that God is so redemptive that we're at an inflection point and we're going to see something different in the earth, something different in the world. And I have great hope about it in the midst of this time, this rough patch and this season that's been so hard. So I just want to say we bless you, and as we start this panel, thank you for my esteemed colleagues, and we're going to try to help provide the best that we can, some answers to questions for this community. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Steve Brickman, and I'm privileged to be the moderator this evening. After the introductions, I'll ask each of the panelists a series of questions that I think are good and relate to the things that are on our mind, and they'll have a couple of minutes, 3 minutes to answer each one of them. And so that's the format. But I want to thank Rabbi Wright and Temple Emmanuel for hosting, and I want to also thank the Alabama Holocaust Education Center and USIA for sponsoring this event. It's a really great partnership to see these two organizations come together. USIA, that I support wholeheartedly, educates members of Congress on the United States-Israel relationship and brings all of us together today in light of what Heather said, in light of the events that are occurring in Israel. I read something today that the rallying cry in Israel is a rallying cry that I think each of us have in our hearts today. Together we will win. That's our rallying cry today. As we join together, I think it's appropriate, Jew and Christian supporters of Israel and a strong United States-Israel relationship, to think about the Psalms that bring us comfort and solace and peace and joy and thoughtfulness at a moment like this. And I think that's the Psalm 133 is a perfect metaphor for the rallying cry in Israel and for what's taking place in this sanctuary at this moment. It's a song of ascents of David. Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers live together in harmony. It's like fine oil on the head, running down on the beard, running down Aaron's beard over the collar of his robes. It's like the dew of Hermon falling on the mountains of Zion. There the Lord has bestowed the blessing of life forevermore. That's our prayer of unity tonight as we stand together in support of the state of Israel and a strong United States-Israel relationship. We've got three incredible panelists who are so knowledgeable and so supportive of the state of Israel, and I want to introduce them briefly, and then I'll ask Senator Britt the first question, and we'll start the program from there, and I'll ask each of the other panelists questions as we go along. I am proud, very proud to call Katie Britt our U.S. Senator from the state of Alabama. She has been an We're so proud of her. She's a great representative of our state, and it's so kind of her to take time out of her schedule and day to spend the day with us. But that's, in essence, who she is. She's somebody who believes strongly in the United States-Israel relationship. She believes strongly in the sanctity of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. And for those reasons alone, plus many other reasons, we're grateful to have her today. But she's a proud champion of the hardworking families for the great state of Alabama. Recently, she worked to grow good paying jobs and opportunity for all Alabamians while standing up for small and rural businesses, a passion first instilled in her by her parents, both small business owners in her native Wiregrass. She believes, like we do, that no child's zip code should determine their opportunity in life. A practicing attorney by trade, as I am, and we'll forgive her for that, she smartly got out of the practice. She previously served as Chief of Staff to Alabama's then senior U.S. Senator and served on numerous boards and committees, which prepared her for her job. A Christian, a wife, and mother, faith and family are at the heart of her life. She's committed to fighting tirelessly to preserve the American dream for our children and our children's children, which is what we say in the Hebrew, Lador Vador, from one generation to the next. Katie now resides in Montgomery in Washington with her husband Wesley, who's a former Alabama football player, and you can tell when you see him, and their 2 children. Our second panelist is a mensch, is a real mensch, and those who are Jewish and those who understand the word would understand that that word applies to Bruce Pearl. He's the head coach of the Auburn University men's basketball team, and probably one of the best, if not the best representative of the Jewish faith in the state of Alabama. In Division I, his teams have won 4 conference championships and 3 conference tournament championships and qualified for 10 NCAA tournaments and 1 Final Four. He's the second fastest NCAA coach to reach 300 victories, needing only 382 games to reach that mark. He was named Coach of the Year by Sporting News in 2006 and awarded the Adolph Rupp Cup in 2008. One of his, I think, proudest moments was serving as the head coach of the Maccabi USA men's basketball team that won the gold medal in 2009, where I think his son played on the team, if I'm not mistaken. His Hebrew name is Mordecai, which is such an apt name at these times, after Queen Esther's uncle Mordecai from the Jewish holiday of Purim. Bruce was the first president of the Jewish Coaches Association, and in 2019 became the 5th head basketball coach to lead a team to the Final Four. The Allgemeiner named Bruce as one of the 100 people positively influencing Jewish life in 2022. I think that honor still resounds today in 2023. A native of Boston, Bruce attended Sharon High School in Sharon, Mass. 1982 graduate of Boston College, where he's the manager of the men's basketball team. He's married to the love of his life, Brandy, and Bruce serves on the board of directors of the United States Israel Education Association. You've heard from Heather Johnston. She's the founder and executive director of USIA. It's an organization that I support wholeheartedly because it is unabashedly and unreservedly and unconditionally supportive of the state of Israel and a strong United States-Israel relationship. When you have somebody like that in that organization, those are allies, those are our friends, those are the people that are sponsoring this event tonight. And I would ask you to consider supporting them in the days ahead because of what they do for the Jewish community, for the state of Israel, and for each of us. But USIA is a nonpartisan organization that educates and serves senior government leaders to advance important dialogue and cooperation between the United States and Israel. Since 2011, she's led advanced educational tours for senior members of Congress to Israel, which make a difference. The tours provide an opportunity to travel through Judea and Samaria and to engage with Israeli and Palestinian leaders who are involved in the geopolitical dynamics and understand the demographic realities of the region, particularly cooperation in business. USIA connects government leaders in the United States with Israel's top leaders and experts on issues related to defense and security, energy, technology, economic cooperation, and agriculture. In addition, through USIA, Heather has facilitated and hosted numerous educational briefings and forums on Capitol Hill to equip members of Congress with knowledge that's relevant for legislation regarding the U.S.-Israel relationship. And that has turned out to be a very impressive credential for USIA. She established Israel's National Leadership Center with the city of Ariel, and since its opening in 2010, it's trained over 85,000 Israelis. She's worked closely with Israel's Ministry of Education to develop this unique educational leadership curriculum. The center has not only trained Israel's top Jewish and Arab youth, but trained all branches of the IDF. She has more than a 20-year involvement with the nation of Israel that has afforded her the unique position to work dynamically inside of the United States-Israel relationship as an educator and thought leader. And she's a world-renowned speaker, as you can already tell, on the Jewish-Christian relationship in modern Israel and biblical prophecy. She studied communications at Auburn and has a master's in theology at Beeson Divinity School. She resides in Birmingham with her husband, Bruce, who's sitting on the front row. And they have 2 children, I think grandchildren too, if I'm not mistaken. So that's our distinguished panel. Let's give them a hand and thank them for being here. My first question is to Senator Britt. As a senator, you've been to Israel twice and just returned a few weeks ago, having heard from Israel's leaders and from the families of hostages who are in Gaza. You saw and heard about the atrocities of October 7th firsthand. What did you come to understand by being there in person, and what was your greatest takeaway?
Thank you first so much for having me. It is truly an honor to be with all of you and to be on this distinguished panel. Obviously, growing up as a Christian, as an Alabamian, as an American, I knew the importance of Israel, but it wasn't until an education program that I truly understood during college the need to stand firmly shoulder to shoulder through all of this. So thank you for what you do, because you change hearts and minds of people all across the country. And Coach Pearl, I mean, there's just nobody better. Watching you stand firm for Israel, stand firm for the Jewish people, being willing to speak and bring people in and educate and move is inspiring for all of us. So this is a real honor. I don't know in 3 minutes that I can tell you all that I saw. It was life-changing and not in a good way. When we touched down in Israel 2 weeks ago, almost to the day, it was an eerie feeling. Having just been in February, March, and seeing the hustle bustle of Tel Aviv, there was a quiet silence that actually filled the space. When they tell you immediately about what to do when the sirens go off, you realize that these things, 90 seconds to get here and do this, these things are part of the daily life of everyone who lives there in Israel. We met with the families of hostages, and it'll rip your heart out when you hear the stories of 3-year-olds whose parents were killed in front of her, whose siblings were hiding in a closet. When you watch the videos, so one of the things when we met with Netanyahu, when we met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, when we met with the various ministers across the Israeli government, when we met with the IDF, they each showed us the videos. And you look back at the Holocaust and you see how people tried to hide the atrocities that occurred once they were caught. These evil, barbaric human beings, if you can even call them that, wore GoPro cameras on their heads. So for all of the people out there, and to the news media, please, please keep telling this story. When people believe that it didn't happen, when you have a child who comes home from college and says, I don't think that's the way it went, I've seen it. I have seen children begging for their lives, shot in front of their parents. I have seen kids begging for their parents' lives as they set them on fire. I have seen the pictures of women with their clothes ripped off, raped, and then slaughtered. I have seen them stand on a man's head and cut it off. We had a hearing this week in front of the Appropriations Committee, and Secretary Blinken told a story that needs to be told over and over again. It was about his time on the ground, his boots on the ground, about a family of 4 who was eating breakfast that morning, October 7th. Father, mother, son, daughter, the father whose eyes were gouged out, the little boy whose fingers were cut off, the daughter whose foot was cut off, the mother killed, them all murdered, and then these barbaric terrorists then cleared them out of the way, sat down at their breakfast table, and finished their meal. This is disgusting. It is despicable. We must tell this story. And I would say my takeaway from all of it is the evil that is Hamas. It is beyond comprehension. It is something that I didn't think or want to believe that human beings were capable of. And then the fact that the existence of the state of Israel actually hangs in the balance, meaning we must eradicate Hamas. And if I may say one more thing, I know I'm out of time.
She can have my time. All of it.
That's why he's a Mitch.
So, guys, when we were sitting across from them, and so we go as a bipartisan delegation, which first off, let me just say, I am so grateful for President Biden, for Secretary Blinken, for Secretary Austin, for standing firmly with Israel, being morally unequivocal when they went there right after the atrocities to say, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. And so we went there as a bipartisan delegation, 5 and 5, standing shoulder to shoulder, not as Democrats or Republicans, but united as Americans, standing with the Jewish people, standing with the state of Israel. But as we talked to them, we had questions about munitions, we had questions about people, we had questions about what went wrong. How did we not know? We ask all of these questions, and one of my colleagues said, I remember after 9/11, my daughter asking me, Dad, are we gonna get the bad guys, and are we safe? And one of the ministers said, let me stop you right there. The difference in this and 9/11 is that when we woke up the next morning, the enemy was not oceans away. The enemy was literally next door. And when we answer that question, those are the same questions that my daughter has asked me. And he said, my wife was trying to tell me where she was gonna hide my daughter if this happened again. And he said, the point of the Jewish state is so that the Jewish people never have to hide again. And so he said, I looked at my daughter and I said, baby, yes, we are going to get the bad guys. But when you have to answer that question, are we safe? In order for Israel to continue in peace, prosperity, and flourish, we must eradicate Hamas. Because the men and women in Israel cannot tuck their children in at night. With Hamas 2 days ago saying, we will do this again and again and again and again until it is eradicated. This is why you cannot have a ceasefire. You must eradicate the evil that is Hamas now. And so the importance of this moment, not only for the Jewish people across the globe, but Israel, became very clear to me, listening and looking in their eyes and talking about what is ahead.
Coach Pearl, Land for Peace, appeasement, and negotiations have been part of the different phases of the United States' involvement with Israel and our hostile neighbors. We can look back now and see how those efforts and policies have not only failed, but also endangered Israel's national security. You've been a strong advocate for Israel all your life to hold on to its land. Why do you believe that's so important, particularly at this moment?
Thank you, Stephen. And Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Are you okay? Okay. I'm going to stick around after this event, and I want to hug. And I want to pray with you tonight at Shabbat service. Senator Britt, with all that you have to do and all that you've done, you've been as strong an advocate for the state of Israel as anybody we have in Washington, D.C. And on behalf of us here in Birmingham, Alabama tonight, we want to thank you for that unequivocal support. When I found out a few years ago that there was a JH Israel, not just a JH Ranch, I'm like, do you want to go? I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And I went, and I saw the work that Heather Johnston and her incredible team was doing, and I was all in. And right now, if we ever needed U.S.-Israel education, we need it now more than ever for Congress, in our synagogues. God bless you, Rabbi Wright, for your stance and your courage, and what an amazing Zionist you are, unapologetically. And we need them at universities, and we have work to do. Stephen, you mentioned the word appeasement. While what we saw we didn't think was remotely possible, why won't we take the words of these terrorists for real? Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Islamic Jihad have been calling for the destruction of the state of Israel and every Jew in Israel. They've been saying it for years. And yet we, as the United States and others, have appeased Hamas, have funded Hamas, has funded the Palestinian Authority. And we, in some ways, have created what Israel is now experiencing. This is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. Hitler told the world what he wanted to do, to the world and to the Jews. He wrote Mein Kampf. He worked it out. How many years did he work it out? But we appeased him. And he murdered 6 million of our brothers and sisters because of their faith. And we said never again. We say never again. And in some ways we allowed it to happen, and I'm telling you, we can't ever let that happen again. Number one, we must destroy Hamas. Number two, we've tried Land for Peace. Thank God where Gaza is located, the vast majority of the land was a desert. If they had come across where Netanya is, between Netanya and Judea, there's 9 miles from there to the coast. They could have cut off Israel, and they could have cut Israel in half. And all the atrocities they could have done if they had attacked in a large city. So appeasement, Land for Peace. We're going to spend some time tonight in Torah. We're going to spend some time tonight in the Bible. So oftentimes we talk about what should happen in Judea and Samaria. And whether the Palestinians should. Our kids believe right now in colleges and universities that they're fighting for their freedom, that there's apartheid, that there's oppression, that there's, like it wasn't, you got what I'm saying. I'm not as good at it as she is. But it's lies and it's propaganda. From the early 1900s, through the British Mandate and so many different things, Israel was offered land, the Arabs were offered land, Israel accepted every single offer, and it kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And yet Israel said yes, and the Arabs continued to say no, because they did not want to be partners in peace. They did not want to be neighbors. They wanted all of it from the river to the sea, and they wanted all of us dead. That's a fact. It may not sound good. It may question your hopes for peace and prosperity, but it's just the reality that's on the ground. When Jacob was dying in Egypt, this is in Genesis, he put his hand on his son, and he said, "Take me to where my father's buried." That's Hebron. Hebron's in Judea. That's part of Israel. Jacob believed it to be true. Abraham paid for the land and believed it to be true, and I'm willing to fight for it to be true. We can't keep giving land back for peace. We can't. In 2005, Ariel Sharon pulled out of Gaza, removed 30,000 Israelis, and that state was created. And this is the result. I know it's heartbreaking. I know it was the way that we don't want the world to go, but that's just the realities. And so we've got to do what we got to do and hope and pray that God's got this, and that on the other side, if we can remove our enemies, find partners for peace, just like the 2 million Arabs that are living in Israel right now in peace and prosperity. You know how many Jews there are living throughout the Muslim world and the Arab world? Israel occupies less than 1% of the Middle East. And yet there are 3 million Arabs in Israel. 99% of the Middle East is Arab, is Muslim. And there are very few Jews there. We are running out of places to go. Thank God for the United States of America. We have a Jewish basketball coach in Alabama. Is this not a great country? Hey, and you heard, she said, War Eagle. Wesley went, oh.
Thank you, Bruce. Hey, now you can see why I call him a mensch, an extraordinary mensch. Heather, the next question is for you. The Biden administration has provided significant support to Israel diplomatically, tactically, militarily, and emotionally. I think Senator Britt referred to the testimony of Secretary Blinken recently that moved her. The United States administration has stated that the goal for expanded U.S. military presence in the region is deterrence, and that's really what Israel's goal is also. Deterrence against the Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Iraq. What next steps should the U.S. and our partners take to eliminate the threat of Iran and our proxies in the region? Because everything that's happened up to date, and Heather will explain it in greater detail, is manipulated and basically controlled by what's taking place in Iran, who call for the death of all Jews. And Heather, if you'll answer that question, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, I will. And I'm sorry I'm sitting here with notes, but I'm going to be really academic about this and accurate. Is that okay? And I think it's so important for us to be informed and to really know what's going on. But just a little bit of history, if you can remember that the United States has been sort of in a 10-year Iranian nuclear process with Iran, agreement. And it started in 2012, and it was called the Nuclear Agreement Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. It was to expire in 10 years, so guess what? It's expired. It went through kind of ups and downs, and the Trump, during the Trump era, that approach was to eliminate that nuclear agreement and to put very strong, crippling, strangling sanctions on Iran, which was very important. We're at the end of that nuclear agreement. Just so you know, there is no nuclear agreement at this point. And so what we need to understand that since 2012, while all of that has been going on, Iran has spent over $20 billion supporting their terrorist proxies in the Middle East. It is their top foreign policy program. They put that as a priority over their domestic needs, so their people suffer due to their huge budget going to the terrorist proxies. And let's be clear that while Hamas's charter was the destruction of the Jewish state, that was the only reason that they existed, and they're not a non-state actor, they're an organization. Their charter was to destroy the state of Israel. Understand that Iran's charter is the destruction of Israel and the United States. So let's understand that, and undermining the Sunni governments in the Middle East. But let's understand they really do mean that. By now, we ought to actually believe them and actually understand that is they're marching toward that end, and they will do anything to reach that end. And so we understand that Iran's uptick in support of Hamas since 2019, they've increased the support to 93% of Hamas's budget is supported by Iran. So be clear about who has supported them and that led to this travesty. And that $350 million goes to them annually. So the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, prioritizes his terror-filled foreign policy with a steady support, and they support the personnel, the operations, and the weapons for all the terrorist proxies in the Middle East. They are the #1 backer of terrorism in the Middle East. And to lose that funding impacts the terrorist proxies. So the aim, unless we just want to bomb the blank out of Iran, which is not a bad idea, while we're in the Mediterranean Sea, why would we not just go ahead and take out the nuclear capacity? Why would we not just trim them a bit. But if we're not going to do that, we have to do something. And there has to be a pivot in the current policy. So I know you think, well, Heather, are you optimistic about that? And I'd like to actually tell you that I am. I think that we have gone through and past an inflection point to horror and shock that is actually changing and bringing about, I believe, hopefully, in the months to come, a pivot in policy, and I've got some good news to announce. What if we could come together in a bipartisan way and go about the foreign policy a little bit differently? What if we could reimpose and enforce a strong sanctions regime like we had back in 2020, where we actually enforced direct sanctions on the central bank of Iran so that Iran would not be able to use even a single US dollar for trade purposes? That's not being enforced today. But what if that were enforced? Think about what that would do. The indirect sanctions, this morning, my good news to tell you is the SHIP Act passed in the House of Representatives. This is hot off the press. You're the first to hear it. I don't even think it's in the news yet. But this morning, 2/3 Democrats and all of the Republicans voted yes on this bill. That it's a shift, I'm telling you, a pivot in the policy. Enforcing existing oil sanctions on Iran and also sanctioning foreign ports, refineries, shipping companies, tankers, and individuals involved in illicit trade with Iran. It prohibits any U.S. products sent from any of these ports. It prohibits any U.S. products to be sent from ports of any foreign country, and those who do so import Iranian oil are also sanctioned. So this is a very, very big deal. If this goes on to the Senate and passes the Senate, it's going to bring a great deal of pressure onto the White House, and let me tell you, we will have pivoted our policy toward Iran. So I just want to say that what that does is it adds pressure to China. China is a big player, and they're buying a lot of oil from Iran. It's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on them diplomatically, economically, and regulating to reduce their imports on Iranian oil. And then I think the next step would be to dilute Iran's oil production. It would be nice if we could open up and extend oil permitting in the United States and be able to lower the global oil prices, increase our domestic ability, and start drilling in the United States, right? Why would we not do that? And then as we watch Saudi Arabia come in, why not collaborate with OPEC and the producers of oil in Saudi Arabia to boost production? All of this kills Iran. It kills their economy. It relegates them to the wilderness. So lastly, I would just say Iran is responsible for funding and directing the Hamas attack on Israel, killing 30 Americans, be clear, taking 15 American hostages. So if you can imagine, it was just a few months ago that we did a hostage swap. We got 6 hostages, but we gave them $6 billion that are sitting in a Qatar bank, a Qatar bank. I don't think that there's any basis for keeping that agreement. Do you? So I think that we need to send a clear message, and Congress is going to do this. They're working on it right now to pass legislation that revokes the waivers, and the message is that these funds need to be frozen permanently and never go to Iran. And that's the next stage. The last thing to say is the Houthi rebels that are trying to send rockets onto American troops and over the Red Sea. Under the Biden administration, they were delisted off the list of terrorist organizations. They need to be relisted. The effort to delist them was to just sort of appease them in our appeasement of Iran. But we need to relist them and put sanctions on them And this is the kind of thing that the American government needs to do. So I just want to tell you, I'm actually wildly optimistic that in the midst of the shock and horror of this war, that we're going to see a little bit more of a cohesive, bipartisan approach to the Iranian policy.
This is for Senator Britt. We understand some of the Biden administration's goals moving forward. What would you say are Israel's top 3 or 4 goals in the war? What's their long game? Did their leaders share that insight with you? And do you think that the United States and Israel are in sync for the future of Gaza and for Israel and what will happen in the future? Do you think the United States will continue to supply Israel with the weapons they need to finish the job?
Without a doubt.
Just like we finished the job with the Nazis. And do you think they'll give Israel the time that they need to finish the war in the manner in which you and the other panelists have spoken?
Yes, so that's a great question. Before I dig in on Israel and the goals there, just to echo what Heather said, I was ranking member last week on the Banking Committee panel about these sanctions. As you know, Senator Tim Scott is running for president, and so he asked if I would sit in for him. And these are the very questions that we were asking, because to her point, obviously, in easing sanctions enforcement, it's allowed Iran to have over $80 billion in additional revenue from oil. And we also know through not closing loopholes and other things, our adversaries like China, like Russia and others are funding this. So we know where it's coming from. Cutting it off is critically important. To her comment about the $6 billion, I am proud to say that is now a bipartisan effort. While the White House has said that they have, an agreement to not move that, we want to see that firm. We want to see that in stone. And so we'll continue to push to where that's a reality. When it comes to the Houthis, there is legislation moving that will force them to redesignate them as a terrorist organization. I have signed on to that legislation among all of these other things. It's critically important that we do that. We know who's funding all of this. The Iranian regime funds the Houthis there in Yemen. They do obviously in Gaza, where we've seen Hamas and Hezbollah to the north. And on that note, I would say, obviously, Israel, first and foremost wants to be able to answer that question to their children, yes, you are safe. And so the eradication of Hamas is number 1 on the board. You look at that and obviously the getting back of hostages. So when you see the faces, and we have them all in front of our office, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, Senator Fetterman has them all up in front of his office. There are many of us that are making sure that those faces aren't forgotten. So finding a way to return hostages safe and sound is obviously also a priority. We've got to make sure, though, we keep this a one-front war. I think Israel wants to keep that the case. When you're seeing what's happening right now with Hezbollah, when you're seeing also the American bases being attacked both in Syria and Iraq. At this current point, we don't have any casualties, but we do have injuries of our soldiers, of American servicemen and women. So taking a look at that and trying to keep Hezbollah from really engaging on the north is critically important. Also, obviously, replenishment of the Iron Dome. Right now, we're good, but needing to make sure that that happens. Obviously, David Sling as well. Munitions, 155s, along with other things. You'll see a lot of that in the request that came down from the president, the $14.5 billion. We'll see Congress. Our question to them was, when we met with the ministers there in Israel, is there anything you ask for that wasn't in the president's request? Because we want to get you every single thing you need. And that came from a bipartisan delegation, and I believe, to your point, we want to continue moving that forward. But I'd say overall, that's it, keeping it a one-front war. And then also there's an additional element of normalization. So we're looking at the progress that the Abraham Accords made. We saw what that meant, not just for peace and prosperity in Israel, but across the region. We're seeing some of that seem to shift. We also, when we went to Israel, we went to Saudi, and we sat down with MBS. We sat down with the Crown Prince. I think it's critically important we keep those lines of communication open. Also, on our way home from Israel, we stopped in Egypt, and we met with El-Sisi. We met with President Sisi there in Egypt to talk about what was happening there in Gaza, to talk about his relationship there, and to do our very best as Americans to say, we want to see peace for this region, but that means normalization. That means ties, true ties to Israel. So I think they've got a number of things happening, but truly, the eradication of Hamas, we can't say it enough, must occur. That is unequivocal, because continued life as we want to know it in Israel depends on it. It truly does.
Thank you. Heather, you spoke earlier about working with members of Congress and educating them to support Israel. In your recent work with experts, Israeli leaders, and with Congress, what's the most important message for leaders to hear right now? To you. They have you next. So.
Okay, good. Well, I'd like to answer that question. I just wrote an op-ed. It hasn't been published yet. Maybe nobody will take it, but so I'll give you my opinion. But I really believe that if you're going to be a world leader and you're going to be on the world stage, you need to be defining reality accurately. And then when you define reality accurately, you need to choose a side. And when you choose a side, you need to stay on that side that you chose on the basis that you chose reality accurately. It's very clear that during World War II, Winston Churchill came to the fore and did what his counterpart, Prime Minister Chamberlain, didn't do, as he was seeking an appeasement plan in the rise of Nazi Germany. And he was doing shuttle diplomacy, trying to create peace in the midst of war. And Winston Churchill not only saw that as a failed policy, but a deadly one. And he rose up and he chose a side. And he made it unambiguously clear, and he went forth and went to the dangerous edge of things and chose a courageous path. Well, we are at that inflection point. And every world leader and leader in our government, I don't care where you are, at state, local level, you need to be defining the reality accurately, and you need to choose a side. And one of the wonderful things about the nation of Israel is that I've been there 25 years, by the way, involved. But it's amazing that within a matter of days, they can get on war footing. The whole nation, I'm telling you, the education system, they can move 200,000 Israelis to the center of the country in a matter of a week. It's remarkable. They are able to climb to the highest vantage point and see what no one else can see or is willing to see. And they have been telling us, I've been going to Prime Minister Netanyahu's office for the last 12 years, taking members of Congress, sitting there listening to him every single time, warning the Western leaders, do not appease Iran. We need to put sanctions on him. It has been his battle cry, the theme of his entire tenure as Prime Minister. And he has stood on one side and asked the Western leaders to join him. And I believe that we're standing at that point, that inflection point, where leaders have to choose a side. I'm thrilled to see France, Germany, and other nations actually traveling in the midst of the war to go meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu and forming alliances and agreements and choosing a side. And what we need now is to make sure that these world leaders need to stay on the side they chose. So that's the advice I'm giving, is choose a side, stay on that side, because it doesn't help too much with all the support from the United States for U.S. leaders to be coming back around and saying, we're not so sure about you, Israel. We think you might need a humanitarian corridor. We think that we're not so sure about you, and we need to check on you because we're not sure that you actually are able to be responsible in the way that you're acting towards civilians in this war. And the more that refrain comes, the more that keeps being put out there, the more the anti-Semitism rises, because it casts a doubt on Israel and puts her at the level of her enemies.
so that everybody's like, well, we're doubting Hamas, we don't like Hamas, but we're not sure about Israel either. And the truth of the matter is, in their war room, they're constantly calibrating, constantly looking at the collateral damage, the prospects, those things, and weighing it through the same lens that you and I would weigh it through. The values, the war rules, all of that. So I was proud of Prime Minister Netanyahu to say today to Tony Blinken, who I really appreciate the efforts that they're making, but it was time for him to say, you chose a side, stay on our side. There is no ceasefire. Not going to be a ceasefire. And we'll stop things when they're ready to turn our hostages over. So this is the point, the inflection point. Define reality accurately and choose a side.
Bruce, this question is particularly appropriate for you because you work on a college campus, and I think this is a question that everybody in this audience is really thinking about today. Silence is complicity. Harassment and intimidation are not covered by the First Amendment. And we're seeing that silence, and we're seeing the intimidation and harassment on college campuses in a manner and form I don't think any of us could have ever imagined in our wildest dreams. And there are wild displays of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and college presidents and deans and other administrators staying silent, which makes Jewish students feel unsafe, makes them feel intimidated, makes them feel harassed, which again is not protected by the First Amendment. And also, you hear people on college campuses talking about supporting Hamas, which is a foreign terrorist organization that calls for the eradication of the state of Israel and the killing of all Jews in Israel. And that's what you're hearing on college campuses. What do you think deans and college presidents and the U.S. government should do? And I principally blame the college administrators, but also the U.S. government could play a role. What do you think they should do to allay our fears in that area?
Before I forget that question, which I'll try not to, I'm 63, I do forget questions every now and then. I just want to add one more thing to what Heather said, because it really does bother me when I hear about the proportional response and whether or not Israel's targeting civilians and, you know, the terrible things that take place in war. How patient has Israel been? When Russia decided to send a couple dozen missiles to Cuba, John F. Kennedy was willing, courageously, to start World War III if they wouldn't put those few dozen rockets on a boat and take them back to Russia. There are 150,000 rockets in Homewood aimed at this synagogue right now over there in Lebanon, right now. Don't tell me about being patient. Doesn't it anger you that at any moment Iran could just call its proxy and go, hey, launch on Israel? That's not an option. So don't tell me about proportionality. We're fighting for our lives. We're fighting for our very existence. As far as the education process, and the reason why, you know, we get involved in some of these things is because you remember back when the athletes, we weren't trusting whether or not we could put our athletes out there onto the court or on the field because they might kneel for the flag and embarrass the university or embarrass the donor base or embarrass our country. Remember that? And everybody wanted to blame the kids. It wasn't the kids' fault. It was our fault. We haven't taught them to love this country enough. We haven't taught them to embrace the opportunities that are available to every single one of my student athletes. We haven't taught them and reminded them that Barack Obama was elected twice as president of this country. You as an African American could be anything you want to be. Have there been roadblocks or obstacles for us to have our success? Yes, there has, everybody, but they're navigable in this country. And then we taught them about patriotism. We taught them about the flag. I brought soldiers in who basically said, I've gone to war and I have fought for the right for you to kneel. But if you did, it would break my heart. And my guys to a man said, sir, we will honor the flag. We will stand at attention. And then we went out and raised some money, millions of dollars, to have more diversity at Auburn, because Auburn is such a great place. Anybody can be successful there. And that was our mission. Together we will scholarships were created. So we need to teach. So on days after this genocide, the most Jews killed since 1945 in a single day, and yet our university presidents and chancellors and leadership could not at least just condemn Hamas. Not even having any kind of a thought about what the process is, but at least condemn the action that took place. And when Hamas and their leaders defend what they've done, their defense is they're freedom fighters. They're fighting the oppressor, the occupier. That's just not true. It's not accurate. And what? We're not teaching it. And so that when our students sit back and wonder, why wasn't there a moment of silence for 33 Americans murdered and dozens held hostage? We marched for George Floyd and police brutality. We worked on that together. But yet, because it involves the Jews, somehow silence is complicity. Dr. King spent some time in this town. He told us that silence is complicity. You've got to go home and win this at your kitchen table. You've got to teach your children. You've got to have these hard conversations. It's not easy. My kids, too, call me. I know, Daddy, but I'm watching what's going on in Gaza right now. It's just breaking my heart. I'm like, honey, it's breaking my heart, too. But we have no choice. Where else will they let us go? And so I hope that you have the courage to not be silent. I'm preaching to the choir here. This is mishbucha. This is my family. I know you're not afraid.
Thanks, Bruce. The next question is to Senator Britt. You sit on the Senate Appropriations Committee and chair one of the subcommittees. What does Congress need to do legislatively to support Israel, as well as to protect our own interests in the region? What do you plan to do?
Yes, thank you for the question. So first, we have to have a shift in policy. We have got to go back to maximum pressure when it comes to sanctions on Iran. We must enforce them. We know where the evil is coming from. We know who is funding it. We have got to dry them out financially. So that's one. I am hopeful. I have called for Secretary Yellen to come in front of the Banking Committee and answer tough questions. I also believe we can never re-engage in something like the JCPOA ever again. When I went to Israel previously, the question I asked them was, I said, hey, I'm new here. Tell me over the last 20 years, what is the greatest mistake that America has made that has put Israel and America in jeopardy? And they said engaging in those nuclear talks changed the dynamics of the region. That was February, March. Folks, when you look at this and you piece this all together to what Heather said earlier, we must change posture. I also asked last week when I had Secretary Austin in front of the Appropriations Committee, what is the red line? You don't have to tell me what the red line is. What I want to know, you've said there's a red line, which I'm glad now there's a red line. I'm glad there's a red line when it comes to actual American engagement. But my question to you is, does Iran know what that red line is? And are we prepared to stick with it? Look, our word has got to mean something. When we said never again after the Holocaust, it has to mean never again. It may be 80 years later, folks, but this is why we have to educate. This is why we have to tell the story. This is why the uncomfortable things that I said to you tonight that I saw, you must tell them again. This is why General Eisenhower said, when the Holocaust occurred, bring in the members of Congress, bring in the media. I want people to see this. I want them to feel it. I do not want there to be any question about what occurred, because that will ultimately make us complicit, and we will be right back here again. We cannot allow this to happen again. We must stand firm. So those things, additionally, I have signed on to a number of pieces of legislation, resolution standing with Israel against terrorism, letters to President Biden and the State Department about refreezing the $6 billion to Iran, that transfer, which they say is hostage to hostage. I have a very different opinion about that. I believe that those were people who were rightfully convicted, given due process here in America. They were enemies of the state. They were terrorists. Those people held in Iran were actual hostages, political hostages. We traded one for one. Then we gave us $6 billion. It's just the continued appeasement of the Iranian regime must stop. Because listen to me. Anyone who thinks you are going to find a moderate in Iran, you are on a fool's errand. Their goal is to eradicate the state of Israel. It is to eradicate the Jewish people. They say death to Israel, death to America. To their earlier point, we better start believing them. So really, thank you. So signed on to solidify Iranian sanctions, revoke Iranian Funding Act of 2023, a resolution opposing the pro-Hamas events. I've signed on to the resolution, removing Iran from the UN General Assembly. They need to be gone. They need to be gone. You cannot have people who speak death to Israel, death to America, and then allow them to come set foot on our soil. Then emergency resupply for the Iron Dome Act of 2023. I signed on to the Stop Antisemitism on College Campuses, which we must do. Folks, I know that I will never know what it's like to be you. That is not lost on me. And I cannot imagine having a daughter and a son of my own. If I were to send them away to college or leave them at the house while I came here in this world under these circumstances, we must stand up firmly and say anti-Semitism, pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist, pro-genocide will not occur. Those types of will not occur on American soil, and certainly we will not let American taxpayers go to fund universities to allow those things to happen on their campus. And then signed on to both the letter and the bill to redesignate the Houthis. To Heather's earlier point, one of the very first things of this administration, they obviously took away the terrorism designation of that, terrorist designation, and we've got to get that right. So we'll be doing that, and then also on the Appropriations Committee, we will be working in every way possible to make sure that Israel has everything she needs to defend herself. Everything she needs to defend herself, which is not only munitions, which is not only weaponry, but it is also our confidence and our voice. And so I will continue to use mine to make sure that people understand that people of all faiths can coexist with peace and prosperity, but good cannot exist with evil. And as Americans, when we see evil, we must look it in the eyes and we must take it down. And what we are seeing right now is evil. So I will continue, in addition to fighting in the halls of Congress, I will continue to use my voice to make sure that the Jewish people and the state of Israel knows that America stands with them.
A couple more questions, but I think because of the time, we're going to pass on those and let you talk to the panelists for a few minutes after this is over. It's one of the most incredible hours that I've ever spent. It's exactly what I needed to hear at this moment in time. It's our moment, it's our history, and to hear you reaffirm the things that we believe in, all three of you, and that we're fighting for, and you so clearly define what we need to do from this point on to give us strength and sustenance in the days ahead has just been so comforting. And when I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago, I used the phrase chazak, chazak, v'net chazek, which means be strong, and when we're strong, we'll strengthen each other. And I think today's panel was a prime example of that we will strengthen each other in the days ahead, thanks to the words and the blessings that you've bestowed on us this afternoon. So Heather, Bruce, Senator Britt, thank you so much for all you do.
Hold on. We're gonna stand. We're gonna stand. Before we conclude and swap for Shabbat services, I want to thank our guest again. And we learned from the Book of Kings when Elijah was running away, he heard a bunch of noise, but he heard that still small voice, and that was the voice of God. For the Jewish community, we've been wrestling with the idea of who are our friends now and what does allyship look like, and some of us have been lamenting with that silence. If we listen hard enough, we really can hear. All hot comma for comma, and all the more so, you heard the voices from the Bima tonight, loud voices supporting the Jewish people in the state of Israel. As a Jew, as a father, as a rabbi, I am forever grateful of the voice, the loud voice that you guys are providing. And for all my congregants and for all the Jews watching, I want to thank everyone here for coming and supporting the Jewish community. Hazak Baruch, strength and blessing.